We've all grown up hearing stories of monsters and frightening creatures living in the shadows. But while many of these fairy tales are populated with fictional predators, it is the human being which is perhaps the most dangerous animal of all. Unrequited love can be painful, but any healthy adult can learn to move on from this pain and respect the wishes of their loved ones. In the mind of a twisted stalker, however, unrequited love became an excuse for abhorrent, selfish, and aggressive behavior. It started innocently enough. Kristen Pratt, a student at the University of Central Florida, responded to a message from a fellow student, Patrick Mashonee. This harmless reply seemed to ignite Patrick's obsessional mind. Soon he wasn't just emailing and messaging Kristen, he was recording a series of frightening videos addressing her directly. Many of these videos contained thinly veiled threats, bizarre statements, and aggressive and frustrated rants. Mashonee uploaded 27 videos to YouTube about Kristen Pratt, texting and emailing a series of chilling threats and demands. Kristen felt her life was in danger and subsequently involved the police. But after being diagnosed as mentally unstable, Patrick was able to reach a plea deal where he would spend just 2 years in jail. While he will also be on probation for 15 years, Kristen fears to this day that his obsession with her is far from over and that one day he may reach out and try to find her, potentially with deadly consequences. Predatory stalkers gain perverse pleasure from making their victims feel helpless. But in one case, a second encounter with such a pervert gave a victim the opportunity to fight back. One day, shopper Candice Spivey was perusing the women's underwear section of a store when 31-year-old Jeffrey Polizzi approached Candice to ask an innocent enough question about a dress he bought for his wife. For Candice, there was something a little too familiar about the exchange. The question the man asked, the way he looked, the way he was holding his phone suspiciously in his hand, as if potentially trying to record her without her knowing. Then it clicked for Candice. The situation had happened once before. 2 years prior, the same man had approached her, that time with 2 young children with him. He had asked about a dress that he wanted to buy for his wife, but then moved into increasingly inappropriate questions. Realizing this, Candice was not going to be a victim of his twisted voyeurism for a second time. She recorded Jeffrey with her own phone, and when he tried to run away, Candice followed him relentlessly, chasing him from the store so that he couldn't do the same to other women who were there. Jeffrey Polizzi was soon identified, as was his record. He had previous arrests for preying on women in public places and filming them without their permission. In 2009, he was convicted for taking photographs of women in dressing rooms without their knowledge. Candice's bravery in confronting Jeffrey may just have made him think twice about doing such a thing ever again. Fame brings with it money, education, and confidence, but it can also bring unwanted attention, increasing violations of one's privacy, and in some cases, stalkers. Stalking behavior is usually an incremental process. The person does not begin as a stalker, but rather their fixations and often their mental health combine in such a way as to create an obsessed outlook. Ricardo López was one such stalker. Ricardo López was haunted by his own self-inadequacies. A constant fear of rejection hounded him, and eventually this fear turned itself towards an unhealthy outlet for solace, obsessing on famous women. Ricardo fixated on an American actress to begin with, but when she ended a relationship with a man and then began a relationship quickly with another, he grew angry at her and turned his fanaticism elsewhere. Björk, the famous Icelandic singer, became the next outlet for his troubled mind. After writing several letters to her, he recorded in his diary a number of strange fantasies about somehow impacting her life. Through these fantasies, he would continually refer to himself as a loser. The focus for this lack of self-worth seemed to be his inability to form meaningful relationships with women. Ricardo's fantasies led him to his stalking behavior. He believed he had some deep connection to Björk, but when she started a relationship with another musician, Ricardo felt somehow abandoned. In response to this imagined slight, López began to formulate a plan. He would make Björk pay for her infidelity. He began to record video diaries, tracking his obsession with precision and coming to the conclusion that the only way he could rectify the situation was to kill or hurt her. He decided he would send a package. Initially, his plan involved creating a bomb with needles contaminated with HIV inside, but after realizing such a device would be too difficult to build, he began making a simplified letter bomb. This cruel weapon was devised to not necessarily kill, but to seriously disfigure Björk permanently once she opened it. After the bomb was sent, López then took his own life. He did so in front of his camera, the last entry in his terrifying descent into violent, obsessional behavior. In that last video, López shaved his head and painted it red and green, smearing his face with black grease paint. And then, as a piece of Björk music reached its crescendo, he screamed, "This is for you," and shot himself in the head while staring into the mirror. Thankfully, López's decomposing body was found before the package was opened, ensuring that no one was harmed. Ricardo López's bizarre desire for revenge ended in failure. The most chilling aspect of all is that López's family, friends, and even therapist had no indication that he was violent. His stalker behavior was a secret, a dark one, which consumed him until the very end. Sometimes dating can lead to confusion when one partner has a very different idea of the relationship than the other. More often than not, this can lead to disappointment. But while most individuals can brush off the unhappiness of misunderstanding, there do exist some people who relentlessly refuse to let go. Prosenjit Poddar was a graduate student at the University of California, Berkeley, from Bengal, India. During the autumn of 1968, Poddar attended folk dancing classes at the International House. While taking these dance lessons, he met Tatiana Tarasov, and the two soon began dating. However, it wasn't long until Poddar and Tarasov started to argue over the seriousness of the relationship. After their disagreement, Poddar began obsessing over Tarasov. When she rejected him, Poddar's fixation became so severe that he began to stalk her and developed an emotional crisis. During this time in his life, Poddar started seeing a therapist, Dr. Lawrence Moore. Moore became increasingly concerned with Poddar when he confessed to him that he held desires to kill Tatiana. Although he never named her, it was very obvious who Poddar was referring to. After 8 sessions, Moore warned Poddar that if he continued with his death threats, he would be given no other choice but to have him committed to a psychiatric hospital. After telling him this, Poddar stopped seeing Dr. Moore altogether. Greatly troubled by this, Moore quickly went to Dr. Harvey Powelson, his supervisor, to discuss the serious matters. Consequently, a letter was sent to campus police informing them of Poddar's death threats. When the campus police interviewed Poddar, he stated that he would leave Tatiana alone. But regrettably, this was merely a lie, and Poddar's stalking behavior only continued. On October 27, 1969, Tatiana was confronted by her obsessive lover. When she tried to flee, Poddar brutally stabbed her to death with a kitchen knife. He then proceeded back to her home, where he called the police, confessing his crime. Prosenjit Poddar pled guilty of manslaughter, but went on trial for first-degree murder. He was shortly thereafter found guilty of second-degree murder. Poddar spent 5 years in prison before a lawyer appealed the conviction. He was subsequently deported to India, where he currently resides and has since married. As human beings, we will sometimes receive fearful insights regarding strangers or situations that may make us uncomfortable. And indeed, there have been many cases in which instinctual perceptions have saved the lives of potential victims. The case of Colette Dwyer and Derrick Todd Lee is a prime example. In 2002, Colette Dwyer was dealing with an unfortunate ordeal. After being unrelentingly stalked by a man whom she believed to be a serial killer and contacting police, her report went unheeded. Thus, she was left having to face her menacing stalker alone. This perilous predicament started at her workplace when a regularly returning customer, Derrick Todd Lee, became obsessed with Dwyer. In 1999, Lee broke into her home and insisted upon staying so that he could love and take care of her. Soon after this incident, Lee was charged with stalking and received probation. Even so, he was soon sent to prison for a different crime committed, unrelated to Colette Dwyer. After spending 2 years behind bars, Lee began stalking Dwyer again. It wasn't long until she heard about the murder of Charlotte Murray Pace, a woman who resided in Baton Rouge. Dwyer was convinced that the perpetrator was none other than her stalker, Derrick Lee. Upon telling police, Lee was investigated, but sadly, a DNA sample was never taken. This was due to the fact that police thought the murderer was Caucasian. After the murder of Pam Keenamore, Dwyer contacted police yet again, but unfortunately, her concerns were still disregarded. Then, in 2003, authorities questioned Lee for the rape of another woman and therefore had his DNA tested. This linked him not only to the rape but also the murders of Keenamore and Pace, as well as 5 others. He was soon nicknamed the Baton Rouge Serial Killer. Lee was sentenced to death for his crimes and is currently sitting on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. That's all for this episode. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to see more from me, please press on screen now to watch another video. And of course, if you haven't yet, please be sure to subscribe to my channel now because you won't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.